Hi, Susanmarie. Welcome to Potterwatch.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell the students who you are?
Absolutely. I am Susanmarie Harrington from the Department of English, where I teach nonfiction writing classes. And I have my office in the library rather than in Old Mill because I also direct something called the Writing in the Disciplines program. So a good portion of my work is reassigned to working with colleagues across campus who are interested in learning how to teach writing and use writing as a meaningful part of student learning experiences in any class, not just in writing intensive classes like TEP seminars.
So what is your question for us today?
My question is, can anybody at Hogwarts really teach well?
All right, so what do you think?
I think for the most part, no. So, although I think the standout teacher in this section of the book that you guys are reading right now is Professor Grubbly Plank, because she simply seems to have a real devotion both to students and to her craft and to the course area that she's teaching. And she clearly really has a vision for what will it look like when students can finish her course? How will they be able to handle magical creatures and take care of them and understand them and keep them? And so she seems to be the person who has the most humane sense of learning outcomes and the most well-rounded set of learning outcomes. And she is completely unruffled by Professor Umbridge when Dolores Umbridge comes in. So I'm a big fan of Professor Grubbly Plank. So
we can imagine the contrast with Hagrid.
Yes. Oh, Hagrid would have been so nervous that he would have just probably said and done things that Umbridge would have thought were the height of inappropriateness, and he would have just made all the things much worse. So.
He probably would have worn his hirsute as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Hagrid is just a terrible teacher with so little regard for his students' physical and mental safety. I mean, so he is. I know that he has really interesting and caring relationships with some individual students at Hogwarts, but as a teacher, he just really seems like an enormous failure to me, which is disappointing because I know we're supposed to like Hagrid, we're supposed to feel a lot of sympathy for and affinity with him, but he is really a terrible teacher.
Yes, he is, unfortunately, and I think the trio knows it, and they're very protective of him, but they know that he's ultimately, and his lack of regard for student safety is not unusual at Hogwarts.
No.
There are several teachers who we could put in that category.
Yes, indeed. Well, and in fact, Snape just seems to have no regard for students, period. I mean, the way he slams the door when people comes in, he has obviously taken none of our workshops here at Writing in the Disciplines or the Center for Teaching and Learning on the importance of reducing affective barriers to learning. I mean, when we talk about pedagogy here, we're always interested in how do you set students up to be able to learn by reducing barriers. And part of that is reducing anxiety, making sure that people see that there are pathways to success. And Snape seems to design his classrooms to make sure that you're acutely aware of all of the ways in which you have screwed up, you are screwing up, and you are going to screw up again tomorrow. So remember all that while you're trying to excel at this difficult task. I mean, he's awful.
Yes.
Yes.
So talk about writing specifically. Do you see any writing instruction going on?
Well, I think no, actually, there really isn't any writing instruction going on. I think there's a lot of expecting of writing. So you have the go write me an essay, write me 12 inches, give me a scroll on. So you have just the expectation that students can go out and write about something. And that writing is always tell me about. It's explain back to me something I probably already know. So it's boring writing for no good purpose, and there's an assumption that everyone can just go do it. And the only question of how to do it seems to be time. Like, so Harry here doesn't have time to do his homework because of his detention, but there's no sense of process or discussion of how you might approach things or whatever. So, I mean, that's bad. There's the writing as punishment in detention, where Umbridge's black quill is drawing Harry's own blood onto the page and inscribing the words on his skin. And that ties back to the notion, I mean, this notion of writing on the board or writing out lines of writing or copying things as a form of punishment in detention is an actual thing that used to happen in some American school settings. And that is just a dreadful thing because it associates writing with drudgery, with pain, with punishment. There's no sense of writing for effect or writing to connect. I mean, actually, the writing that has an impact that we see here is not writing instruction at Hogwarts, but the discussion of the Quibbler and the Daily Prophet. I mean, so you've got journalism somehow out there in the world where there is some discussion in other parts of other books about the reporting processes or crappy ethics of different reporters and whether they're making stuff up or not. But in terms of school writing, it's purely explain something I already know, so I don't really need to read your work to know it, and very either transactional or punishment. So it's not a very modern curriculum.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked about it in class, the ways in which they have the expectation that students already know how to do certain things, even though a good chunk of them are arriving from the Muggle world and may actually have an advantage if they've been to school and learned some basic math kind of things or learned how to write.
Yeah.
But some of them are presumably homeschooled, and they're all sort of converging in age 11 with this expectation that they kind of can already do a number of things and are ready to launch into these like content-based magical education.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's very strange to me.
Yes, yes.
There's no continuation of any of those sort of Muggle subjects that might
like math. Yes. Yeah.
Because they go on to, you know, banking careers, or a lot of them work at the ministry, which is a lot of writing, is a lot of that kind of thing.
A lot of bureaucracy, yeah.
And of course, we see in this book the fixation on the owls.
Yes.
Standardized testing.
Yes.
So what do you make of that sort of that plot line?
Yeah, and the high stakes testing, and do you really need it or not? Like what's and do you need to go on for your newts right after that? So yeah, it does seem to make the courses almost in a way fade away then, because the only thing that matters is the owl performance, and so it really solidifies a focus on just that moment of passing the exam, and it almost doesn't matter. Did you do your homework? Did you not do your homework? How well did you do in the course? How poorly did you do in the? I mean, and in some ways, there is something to be said for that, because it gives people who are able to prepare for the exam another avenue to success. You know, it doesn't require exactly prior good grades in a course or prior teacher approval in a course, but definitely it is. It's creating a system where it just seems like the courses fundamentally don't matter very much, and that just seems very sad for a boarding school. Like, you'd think you'd want the courses to be of longer lasting importance.
But we see in the books that most of the education that at least the trio seems to get is really outside of class.
Yes. Yes.
They do a lot of self and educating each other.
Yes, and yeah, and so in terms of writing, Hermione is like saying, "I'll fix up your papers for you," but I mean, she would never get accepted to work in our undergraduate writing center with an attitude like that. Right? Because,
she's not a writing tutor material.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, and so she's generous-hearted and is always looking out for I mean, you know, over and over, she's rescuing them academically. So, I mean, she's very generous and she's a good friend in that respect. I think it would be good if everyone could be Hermione, or everyone could have a friend like Hermione. Our lives would be much improved. But yeah. Yeah, the other thing, Umbridge's introduction, where she gives that boring speech at the Welcome Back to School banquet, which right there shows you her disdain for students, because she launches into this very official ministry talk, which students, except Hermione, all tune out. But her theory of education there is that knowledge has to be honed and held onto and polished by teachers. And that tells you a lot about, I mean, that's presented as, her speech is presented as a like coming of a new direction, and oh goodness, the ministry is starting to meddle. But it really does seem like Hogwarts all along has assumed that knowledge is to be held onto by the teachers. That's what all those assignments are about. I know this, you don't know this, prove to me that you know it. And that's just sad. There's so much more they could be doing in terms of discovering ideas and making connections, and doesn't the magical knowledge base expand and grow over time? And I mean, so surely things should be more dynamic than they are.
And I think at the absolute extreme, we have Professor Binns, the ghost,
yes,
who literally gives these long lectures that no one can stay awake during, and
yes,
is so infrequently asked a question that he doesn't know anyone's name, and is startled, I think, in book 2 when Hermione asks the question.
Yes, 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 you don't even have to be alive to teach the curriculum. Yes.
No, you can be absolutely dead. And he says something very silly about history. It's something about how, let's go back to the facts, like history is facts. There's no, it's just like it is as it is, and we have no sort of building of that knowledge or different perspectives or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So who would you say overall, I know you said Professor Grubbly Plank does well in this segment. Who would you say overall is the best teacher at Hogwarts?
Well, I think Grubbly Plank is the best. You mentioned Sprout earlier when we were talking, and I have to say I don't remember Sprout too much, so you and your students can figure out where would Sprout pick in. But I still think that Grubbly Plank is the person who is giving the most tips, who is acting as though students are actual learners who need to be guided through how to learn things, and has the clearest vision of what you should be able to do. So I think now Professor McGonagall also has a nice sense of scaffolding and a nice sense of clear outcomes, where she seems to be privileging the skills that people will be learning in terms of the spells she's trying to teach them, and she is giving them tips on how to do the spells, and she's clearly scaffolding the spells so that things get more and more difficult as you go on, which means she's helping them achieve those higher levels of difficulty. So I'm going to go with Grubbly Plank and McGonagall. All right. And everybody else is really bad.
Well, we can. Lupin's not in this book, but we all have a soft spot for Lupin.
Okay.
Because I mean, I guess another thing that's sort of interesting is that you have this sort of career teachers, and then you have these people who cycle in, and we seem to get the best and the worst amongst the cycle in people.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you get a Grubbly Plank and a Lupin, but you also get kind of, well, you get Umbridge.
Yeah.
Whose teaching method is no better than her sort of speechifying.
Right. And she's evil. I mean, really, teachers should not be evil. So, yeah.
Right. Well, with that, I will thank you for.
Although Quirrell is interesting because possessed by Voldemort, but
he is. I mean, Barty Crouch Jr. is not the worst teacher, considering he's also a sociopath who's trying to kill Harry.
Yeah.
So.
People and wizards are complicated.
All right. Well, thank you, Susanmarie.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.